Do you know the other thing that we can cut this? Doesn't actually matter, or it can be a cold open. But the other thing it just occurred to me that I wouldn't mind vibe coding is like some version of Screen Studio, because part of me doesn't want to pay the $20 a month or something, because I only would use it like, once a month or once every 2. Like, I just don't get enough use.
I didn't think that was a subscription. I bought it once.
Oh, you can just pay for it once forever.
I'm pretty sure.
Oh, okay.
Because I don't continue to pay for it, but I do have a pro license for it.
Well, I looked at it like last month, and it was like $20 a month or something.
They might have changed.
And I was like, ugh.
Everybody loves subscriptions these days.
Yeah.
Everyone wants to be a stripper.
Well, that's it. But it feels like that's the kind of thing I could vibe code. That would be handy. So that and like, the what's Chamath's thing? The 80-20? 80-20 version of video audio editing.
Yeah.
Just strip out 90% of the features I'm never going to use.
Yes.
And create a simple version of that. That would be cool.
Probably. There's probably an audience of just people on Instagram that don't know how to do any of these things that will lap up simple versions of stuff. Yeah. I mean, not being on Instagram and never having been on Instagram, I don't know too much about that world, but I imagine they exist.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I feel like we talked about a SaaS app player last week. I feel like this stuff is just there's going to be a market for it. There are going to be laggards, right? This is the classic law of diffusion of innovators.
Yeah.
So I feel like that mid-market and laggards are going to persist a little bit longer.
Yes.
But anyway, do you want to do an intro?
Welcome to Good Stuff.
We're back. Episode 2, we made it.
So we promised we were going to talk about the value trap.
The value trap, yeah.
And we also said that we were going to record video and have like a little whiteboard that we could wave in front of the camera, but we haven't done that because we just sat in town.
Yeah.
Like a nice fancy karaoke room.
Do you know what's funny? Like, we set out to do a lo-fi podcast. And now, like, it's episode 2 and we're in this really, like, fancy room with, I don't know, what are these couches made of? Is it some sort of fabric velour? I don't even know what it is.
I don't know. They look like something out of a porno, so
yeah,
that's why the camera's pointing at the door.
Not at us. Don't want to get ourselves in trouble.
But
yeah.
Anyway,
it can still be lo-fi, right?
This is like I think lo-fi just means low production values. We don't need to put tons of money and time into editing video. Let's just talk and then put it out there. And then hopefully, or at least my plan is, that should be a little bit more genuine.
It should be.
It should be.
As I was saying earlier, listening to No Solutions.
Yes.
Basically in a wind tunnel, like in a storm, with a bus stop flying off, being damaged. It definitely adds something to the experience.
Well, I think what I've noticed is that I will listen to a podcast with crap audio. It doesn't bother me.
It doesn't bother me. Yeah.
Like, what I like to listen to is just a nice, big, long conversation between, ideally, like just a couple of people that I think are interesting.
Yeah.
And just having a chat.
Yeah.
And like that, I get a lot out of. I can listen to those all day. I think when stuff is super produced and people are trying to sell me too much, it's just less interesting. Like, I think that's what Rogan, tapped into, really. He's just genuine and seems really interested.
Yeah, exactly.
Stuff. I listened to a little bit of Theo Von recently as well, which is not really somebody I would gravitate to.
Yeah.
But again, he seems like his heart's in the right place.
He's just super curious.
Yeah, and I think he really wants to help a bunch of people. It was the one he was talking to the guy from Dirty Jobs, who did there's basically the TV series about working in sewers and various different things, and he runs this big foundation to get people in America skilled up for manual jobs and trying to get people out working and proud of themselves and different things. But it was cool. And they had, I don't know, there was something about the way they were talking. It seemed like Theo just really cared about the fact that a lot of people just didn't have much going for them, and he wanted people to be inspired and find some meaning, and he talks a bit about in general his own addictions in the past, and I think he's had pretty rough times with a lot of stuff, and I don't know, I have time for that. It felt really,
definitely,
as I said, it felt genuine, which I think is the goal.
They're authentic chats. It's not like I've got a new book that's come out or I'm launching a new product, and that's kind of like old world media through a new paradigm. It's like you go and do the media circuit because you've got something to sell. you know, and it just feels like, oh, instead of going on a talk show, you're just going on a podcast.
I
To
do
like
feel
chill a bunch of stuff.
We're sat here going like, you know, we should just be super genuine on our podcast talking about it. It just makes, yeah, and I was like, oh God. Oh well. I mean, if anybody that actually listens to this, I think they probably won't care. Like, if you can be bothered. Although we did have some, we did have a bunch of listens. Like
we did, yeah.
I was pleasantly surprised. I've had people like texting me on Signal, like with feedback and
brilliant,
like asking for things in the next episode.
What kind of feedback did we get? Was it all positive? Or?
It's a bit quiet on Spotify.
That was my feedback.
That was quite common from a few different people.
Good.
Well, like once it was up, again, like, you know, people have a volume control. Like it's changeable. It means that what we want you to do is just sit in a quiet space, you know, eyes closed, concentrating, and just focus. Like, you can't be around other distractions with a conversation like this.
Because all the distractions are going to be on the audio.
So, there was like a little
in fairness,
track of like somebody talking on the phone, like slightly out of shot, stuff like that. But
it was mid-school holidays at the beach. There was like a car idling its engine right next to us for half of it. People having conversations, kids walking by. You know, it was hectic, but it was good.
It was fun. Well, we've upped it with a acoustically panelled karaoke room at a fancy club.
I hope so.
Like, hopefully this will be slightly better audio this week. But
we've remembered to hit record.
I'm pretty sure, yeah.
That's the key thing.
Yeah, look,
that's what it's all about.
6 minutes in.
Yeah, we're good.
There you go.
Off to a flying start. All right, so we're going to chat about the value trap.
Yes.
I'm proud of the value trap.
I like it.
It's like, I don't know, it's like a few months worth of intellectualizing that we've also branded. And it feels nice, because it feels like this is like this is a concept we can own that I don't really think too many people are talking about just yet. So this could be fun.
I mean, obviously, I don't like to own concepts personally, because I think all IP is just nonsense and bad for society. But
we're giving it away for free. That's the point of the podcast.
Yep.
That's the key. So do you want to give like the TLDR on this, like the overview, and then we can dive in?
Yeah, so it doesn't exist yet, but if you go to, hopefully, at some point, if you go to otherstuff.studio/value trap, which I reckon all one word, or
I mean, right now we don't have it
doesn't
that,
exist
so
yet.
we
We'll
can
put it up.
We can make it that,
but value trap all one word,
probably.
Yeah. Okay. And then there'll be a visual which explains what it is we're talking about, which might be helpful. You could probably look at it once.
We'll pop it in the show notes
and understand it. But
yeah.
But what the idea here is, this is a curve that we talk about almost constantly. Right? Every meeting that we go in, and it becomes like this great context setter for how we think about I don't know, like what happens to various businesses and industries, like as we move forwards into this world where we have AI native businesses. And we always frame it around two curves, one that shows revenue and one that shows operating expense. And what you could imagine is that a very, like, your status quo position, like right now, would be, we can imagine there's a business and it's got a revenue flatlined at around 100. And we'll just call it 100 units of whatever currency you want. Could be hundreds, thousands, could be 100 millions, like whatever. But we'll just call it 100 for easy maths. And then the cost line that's associated with that in a normal service business, like pretty standard, would be 90. And that's pretty flat. And you say, all right, for every 100 that I earn in revenue, it costs me 90 to get there. And I have roughly 10 of profit without getting too into the weeds of the accounting. And that would be a pretty normal place to start. And then what we're suggesting is that phase one of the value trap would be the implementation and the cost reduction process. Which is, we talked a lot last week about saying the big win here with AI is, like, how can I take a bunch of processes that I use humans for, take the human out, move them to the edge so they're only used when they're required, and then run the thing in silicon, effectively. And what does that do to the cost? And we said, like, look, we've seen examples where this drops like 50 to 80%, and it's huge. as a number. And so what you would see on that curve is that your revenue could hold steady because you've already got your customers there. You've got recurring revenue, you've got contracts, you've got people that are interested in working with your business, and then you just had your cost to service them. So if you take the money out of the cost to service them, then what happens is that your operating costs just crater, and you just open up like a huge profit inside that space. So all of a sudden, let's be aggressive in this one, and we say like your costs go from 90 to 20, and your revenue stays at 100. And so the first thing that happens is now you've got a profit of 80. And if you take a business that had a profit of 10, I mean, what would you say? Like, can you give us a quick enterprise value calculation for this business?
Put me on the spot
like,
here.
Podcast maths.
Let's just say it's 100 million. We'll keep it the same 1 times revenue.
Okay.
We'll say it's 100 million, and I don't know. Let's say what we're doing is we're going to create another like 400 million of enterprise value by dropping the cost. So let's just say it goes from 1 to 5. We'll just keep round numbers, right?
Yeah.
But that seems like it'd be a really valuable exercise for a business with otherwise pretty consistent revenue and cost.
Yeah, I mean, if you go from 10 million, so if it's 100 million, 10 million profit to 80 million profit over the course of a year because you can pull the cost out of the business, you can understand why that would be interesting.
Well, especially relative.
You've just got 8 years worth of profit.
Yeah, and it's relative to your peer competitors in whatever industry you're in, right? Because you've now just changed the game entirely. Like, the economics of that business have shifted so dramatically, and so it makes sense that you'd want to assign a premium to that business.
Yeah, which is a great segue into phase 2, right? Because so another thing we talked about last week, I think, like at length, was you also start to take the bottleneck out of the system. So previously, like if you scaled your operation and you needed to add more people, then everything becomes more complex. So like as you then bring in more customers, you need more people, and so your costs go up and it becomes hard to scale. In a world where you've done the work that you're running effectively like computer first processes with humans at the edge, there's no additional complexity in that scaling necessarily. And you've just opened up your profit margin, which gives you pricing power. So the obvious next like second order effect is
Growth.
Yeah. Absolutely. Like why would you not grow?
Well, I think what's interesting there is like most of these businesses, especially if we're like talking through the lens of traditional service businesses, which is kind of what we identified last week as the vehicle to which value accrues, right? So if you're looking at those businesses traditionally, in order to grow, you need to throw more bodies into the business, but there reaches a point where you hit diminishing marginal returns. So adding more bodies to the business ends up just costing you more, so you just don't do it. You know, it's that like, can you justify the investment in another human if it costs you like $150,000 to hire another human? You know, what's the relative value per employee you have to get in order to justify it? Well, you kind of want at least 2.5 times the cost, right, to make it worthwhile, but you can't really achieve that when the cost base is that high.
Then you have hiring costs, you have, the time taken to get that person, then you've got the cold start problem of like, how do we get them effective from day one? So it could take several months. Whereas again, like if ramping up your ability to service your clients is a question of spending slightly more on compute, that can be done, straight overnight. So it definitely I keep saying like it takes the gloves off. Yeah. I honestly don't know where I've got that saying from. But I think that's it. It's like you've got this ability where all of a sudden you've got profit. You've got an outsized profit for your industry, which gives you pricing power inside your industry. And if you have that pricing power, then the second order effect is you're very likely to increase your market share in order to capture more of that. So you would generally see the revenue line grow. And remember, the cost line fell. So if now if you've taken your costs from 90 to 20 and you had this huge increase in enterprise value because of that, well, now you've also taken your revenue from 100 to what? 10% more? 20% more? 50% more? Double? Like, is there any reason why it should necessarily even stop there?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, who knows?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, it's not only the the kind of the human constraint around servicing more customers. If you remove that human constraint, then theoretically there's no limit to that growth.
I don't, yeah, I think so. I mean, I think this is what you've seen play out in a lot of software businesses over time, which is that once you move the entire process into software, and that next marginal customer costs no more to service than your baseline, then you generate huge profits at huge scale, and that's very attractive. So great.
Yeah.
Done.
I mean, that's the key, is establish pricing power and use it, right?
Yeah.
It's like all of your competitors at that point, all of your peer competitors are playing a kind of a traditional game. And then what you've done is you've come in and gone and rewritten the rules. Mm-hmm. You're like, I've got this pricing power, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to slash the costs for customers here. We're going to make it so appealing for them to just switch to us, especially in these industries where switching costs are pretty low anyway. They're going to be more price sensitive. You're going to hoover up all of this demand, and your peer competitors are going to be thinking, wow, okay, shit, we've got to figure out how we remain competitive here.
Yep.
And that implementation part of the curve then becomes really critical for them, right? It's like, how quickly can we adapt? How quickly can we go and implement that ourselves before it becomes a terminal problem? Because if your AI native competitor now is just hoovering up all of your customers, you've got to act faster than the first mover did to go and implement, right? And that speed becomes a growing factor over time as more and more of your peer competitors implement AI.
And slash could be, I come in at 10% less than you, 20% less than you. If I've done the work properly, I've got a lot of capacity there to move those costs down. Yeah. And I could take a long game. I could lock people into longer contracts at what is currently quite a high price. And there's a real reason to do this. And like what it looks like you've created at this point in time is just a magic money printing machine. Because if you've got established product market fit, you've got long-term recurring revenue, and then you've taken your costs down super low, you're just printing a lot of money, right? And then you add the growth to that, and all of a sudden you think, oh my God. And then I know our experience over the last 6 months with, working with the guys in Stackwork and their strategy and who they're talking to was, look, there's real money out there that is very aware of this situation, both in the private equity space and in the venture capital space. And I think the private equity space would look at this and say, well, we're used to, like 500 points, and that's amazing, and we can make money off that. But you're telling me you can take it down, 5,000? We're taking 50% of the cost out of this thing? Like, this is like a wet dream for private equity firms. And then I think for the VC contingent, it's less about, like, they're used to big bets and big payoffs, but it's about, like, that hit rate. Right? It's like saying, okay, well, we're used to throwing money at 1,000 things so that one pays off. But you're telling me that this is, like, there is no product market fit death chasm here. Exactly. They already have it. Yeah. And they've got contracts and they've got revenue and they were profitable anyway. And you're saying you can come in and just do this and I still get the return profile that I need, only I could do it at like a 5 out of 10, 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10 sort of hit rate, because you can just look at the business ahead of time in due diligence and figure out where it's going to work. This is amazing. And yeah, like, surprise, surprise, they're raising funds to then go and execute on this as a strategy. I think I said it last week, but if anyone's interested in pursuing this strategy, just reach out and we can make intros or whatever. Like, it's fine. But we did call this a value trap.
Yes.
So far it just sounds like a value.
That's right.
So where's Akbar in this?
Yes.
So what happens?
The key thing here, right, is this is just markets doing what markets do. What we've introduced here is excess returns.
Yes.
And so the lure of excess returns is competition emerging to compete away those excess returns, right? You've just made an industry really attractive for incumbents and new entrants to actually go and capture more of that value that's on offer. And so what we're going to see here is you might have achieved that 120 units of revenue, or 150, or whatever that growth rate was for your business. And now what we're going to start to see is more and more of these entrants come in, that pricing power is lost, and your revenue starts to drop. And your costs are obviously way lower because you've gone and implemented those cost reductions in that first phase, but now you're seeing this margin reduction. And of course, like we just talked about, what that growth rate combined with the cost reduction does to your enterprise value, well, you're going to see the reverse of this now, where your enterprise value starts shrinking because you're seeing this mean reversion play out over time.
Yeah.
And I think that is where the trap occurs. And this is maybe the thing that even the capital allocators might not be thinking about, right? Because I think the way we pitch this is it almost sounds like every business is going to like be a beneficiary of this long term. We just think, we can rewrite the rules in basically any business that we point this at. And so every business looks seductive from a value capture perspective.
Yep.
But I think the key thing with the value trap is it shows us that there are essentially going to be winners and losers. There are businesses that you want to go and invest in, that you are going to want to own, and there are businesses that you don't. And I think the key to identifying these is to look at that rate of mean reversion. How steep is that curve going to be? If it's super steep, it probably means that there aren't too many persistent barriers that prevent those new entrants from coming in and eating up that excess value that's been created. And so what you want to do is look for businesses that have really strong persistent moats. And like I think this has been like an interesting source of dialogue on X and other places recently, where people are talking about moats a lot more. And in the past we'd look at proprietary data and network effects, and these kinds of moats are really effective for SaaS. And I mean, ultimately, I think the key thing here is like regulatory protection in certain industries that prevent new entrants from coming in organically, where there's like a compliance hurdle that exists. I think those kind of industries are probably going to lag on this mean reversion longer than the others. I still think it occurs, but I just think it occurs slower. And so the pace at which you see that just means there's more of a window of opportunity in those businesses, whereas others might collapse much faster. And the risk for a capital allocator there is, okay, you've bought this business, you've gone and created all of this outsized value in the business, you've gone and 5x or 10x your enterprise value, but all of a sudden this mean reversion has hit you so rapidly that now your business may actually end up worth less than what you paid for it 5 years down the line, right? So that's the key thing to avoid. So I think, like always, picking winners is the key skill here, and you kind of want a set of heuristics for how to find those winners. So I think looking at
just to recap a minute for people listening along would be, so the stages here is we have status quo, flatline, profit and revenue. Stage one, or stage two, let's call it, would be cost reduction. So your costs go down, your revenue stays flat. Amazing. You're printing money.
Yes. Stage
3 is the second order effect of that is now you can grow. And now your revenue goes up and your costs are still low. This is brilliant. You could have 10, 100,000 extra enterprise value at this point.
Yes.
This is amazing. You're onto an absolute winner. Enter competition, stage 4. And then all of a sudden, other people are pulling the same trick that you've done, because there really is no technical moat here. A lot of this stuff is open source. A lot of this stuff is available. It just takes time and tooling and, just the mental power in order to do it. But if it's worth that much money, then it will happen. So then you see the competition come in, you lose your own pricing power, more people enter the market, and effectively we see that mean reversion back to this level that's lower, but still with the same sort of profit margin. So maybe it's still a 10% profit margin at the end of the thing. It's just that at the start of it, we started at, a 90 and 100, and we had a 10 profit, and at the end of it, maybe we're at 20 and 5.
Yes.
Sorry, 20 and 25, and we have a 5 profit, and therefore we've actually lost enterprise value and scale. So, was it actually a great idea to go and say acquire this company, in stage 1, where it looked great in stage 3?
Yeah.
It looks less good in stage 5, and so there's a few options around. What do you do with that? Because you getting these outsized returns is the thing that causes your own death in a way. And this is not a bad thing for society as well. It's very worth thinking about, is that what you've done is just massively reduce costs in this industry. So the flow-on effect to anybody who's like a consumer of these goods and services is way cheaper prices at the end of it. So everything's got cheaper, but what happened in that transition is like a bunch of jobs got displaced, a bunch of costs went up and down, like the value of the business shifted. Like it's a messy transition period.
Yeah, there's a world of abundance there, which is probably the subject of a different podcast. But I think
it looks good in like 20 years time.
Yeah, exactly.
But like it's scary now.
But I think the other key thing here for like if you're in private equity, you're probably thinking like, okay, so the key decision is the first thing is we've got to find businesses that like fit this model really well. The second one is you want to be able to exit to capture that liquidity at a reasonable point in the curve. So you've got to know when to offload this business. Because if it's too late in the cycle and everyone sees what we see, and then you're relying on like a greater fool theory to actually be able to exit the business.
I do wonder if you could.
Yeah, I don't think you'd
like,
find
at
anyone.
scale, like how do you sell it? Maybe you can, like maybe SoftBank just buy everything.
Yeah, exactly.
At the top. Sounds about right.
I think you are relying on like the greater fool theory at that point to actually cash in, and so I would be hesitant to suggest that there isn't a greater fool. Like if there's one to be found, we will find one.
Yeah,
it's probably
unfortunately.
But I think if you're thinking about this question about like how do we capture this value, the chart essentially lays out a bit of a roadmap for when to get in, where you should get in terms of what companies you should go and acquire, and then like when to exit. So yeah, it shouldn't be at a point where it's so obvious that this mean reversion is going to occur, because then no one will want that business. It will just be like a very quick and punishing race to the bottom.
Yep.
Whereas I think the optimal point in the curve, if you're a capital allocator, is almost when you've extracted the most cost out of the business. Because your revenue could continue to grow, but your cost base is so low. At that point, you'd probably be like, okay, let's test the market on this. Because even if your revenue stays the same in the vast majority of these businesses, even if you don't get growth, but you've taken 60 to 80% of the cost out of the business, like that's going to be worth significantly more. And it's going to be that enterprise value is going to be relative to the market that business plays in. So its peer competitors. And its peer competitors are not going to have those kinds of economics. So it's going to look really valuable.
Yeah.
So that might just be the peak of the cycle for that business. If you get growth, then great. That's amazing. But yeah, that feels like it'd be an interesting chart exercise to try and like model for capital allocators. I feel like that's a logical question for them to ask.
Yeah. And that's like the capital allocation point is like one viewpoint we take on this chart, right? And then the other one would be, all right, well, you own a business.
Yeah.
Like one of the ways I often use this is to talk about it like, you got to imagine like this is not necessarily just your business, but this might be the average business in the industry. And you can imagine the industry looks a bit like this, which is that, costs go down for some people, they go down later for other people. Like the revenue profile and your ability to charge prices is going to be dictated broadly by what everybody else is doing in the market. So if somebody else can start doing it cheaper, the prices are going to come down. This is why tellies are cheaper. If you give everybody access to produce tellies, and then whoever produces them cheapest gets the biggest market share, the price of your telly goes down every year because of that. Right? That's, as you said, this is markets doing markets. And so I do think it's an interesting case to say, like, all right, well, if I've got a cost base of 90, but it's okay because the prevailing rate at which the market charges for this service is 100, then I'm okay.
Yep.
If the prevailing rate the market charges goes to 95, I'm still okay. If the prevailing rate at which the market is charging out hits 90 or 85, then I lose money. If it goes to 50, I'm probably bankrupt pretty quickly at that point. I just can't compete. And so it does start to drive some urgency around a few decisions, which is like, okay, well, if this sounds logical and you think that there could be a set of VCs and private equity firms out there that are willing to buy existing businesses or fund competitors into industries, and there aren't massive barriers to entry in the industry that you're in, then what you might expect is over the next 3 to 5 years for that pricing power of your industry to drop. And that if you do not have enough capacity to absorb that in your own cost base, then you could be in trouble within the next. I think we generally peg this out as like a 5-year transition.
Yeah.
And we might be more, like I probably would have said like a 10-year transition prior to working with Stackwork. And then like through experience, I'm like, okay, this could be 5. Like I might be just a little bit naive there. Like I think when you see people doing this, it does change your view of these things. But let's say it was a 5-year transition. Like I feel like in that 2 to 3 years, like as the competition comes in, you're gonna start seeing businesses just go under because they just don't have an ability to deal with this. And I think, like we've talked about this a bunch, obviously, but there's maybe like two ways to deal with that, which is you take the business that you have right now, and you apply these techniques, and you say, okay, well, if this is what's going to happen, and there's all of this benefit to reducing my costs, then I should go and do that because that's going to be great for me. And you try and run that cost curve yourself as quickly as you can, and hopefully you're ahead of everybody else in the industry, and you have an outsized return because of that.
Yeah.
And then the second one that obviously we've been focused on as well is like, well, what's the version of this which doesn't assume that you keep the same business? Because this is what I think is probably more likely to come out of some of the, let's say the VC level investments would be, okay, well, instead of coming in and buying a business, and we have that ability in the areas where there's such a low barrier to entry into these market segments, why don't we just come in and start the business fresh? And then we come in with a new competitor. I mean, I think this is, so we were talking to some guys the other day, they were talking about Deloitte, was it Deloitte or Accenture?
Accenture, yeah.
Yeah, and I said, like, it's, you know, they've come into the design space, they're offering a different product, which is AI and digital native, and they're just going to undercut everybody, like, at scale. And the idea there is you actually start the business, like, AI native first.
Yeah.
Instead of trying to, you know, take your business and then reform it, like going through maybe industrial relations issues around like, well, how do you reduce costs? Like, what are the roles? Like running through the change management component. There's also the second version, which is somebody else just comes in with 0 employees or 10 employees to your 100 and then just runs a gamut on you that way. And I think these are the two most obvious ways to take advantage of that curve, is that you want to be as low cost as quickly as you can realistically get away with.
Yeah.
In order to make it through. And making it through is probably job number 1, is still be here in 5 years.
Yeah, I feel like I think there's a couple of observations here. The first is like, let's try and define the kind of business that operates really well through this transition. So we talk about like traditional service businesses, right? We don't have to like be specific about industries and types of businesses, but I think, you know, I kind of mentioned earlier there are a bunch of characteristics you would look for, and I think most of these characteristics are kind of anchored to what essentially drags out that mean reversion over a longer arc of time. So, you know, where are the barriers going to continue to exist? So I think the things you would kind of hope for is like, you know, businesses with like really strong credibility and trust. So that's brand probably. You know, really good, strong customer relationships probably dovetails off that a little bit. Businesses where, or industries where there are really high costs of customer acquisition. So it's, you know, harder to switch as well. Switching costs are probably a feature of this as well. You know, CapEx intensive businesses to actually go and start. I think is probably, if you need a lot of CapEx just to get going, that's probably, you know, a barrier to entry as well that persists to some degree. Data, I think, is one that everyone throws around. So proprietary data is like a moat that I think is probably more a feature of the existing paradigm. I think over like a long enough time period, those moats are transient.
I think so.
And then the big one was regulatory moats, which is what I kind of identified earlier. And I think like what this establishes, right? We kind of term these like traditional service businesses, but I think what this establishes, there's like a paradox here that exists. And the paradox is that the businesses that stand to benefit the most from going and automating a lot of workflows and cutting a lot of cost out of the business are actually the least likely to go and do it on their own. And there's a couple of reasons for that. I think the first is that, like, these kinds of businesses traditionally are technology laggards. They tend to be the slowest to adopt new technology, just generally. It doesn't really matter what it is. You know, some of these businesses we were already well into the SaaS era, and they were just adopting like SAP. You know, it's like, what are you doing? And then the other aspect...
I mean, just don't adopt SAP.
Just don't. Just skip it.
It just hurts. You don't need that in your life.
Yeah. And then the other aspect that drives this paradox is that, you know, management within these bigger traditional service businesses, especially as you tend to scale headcount, they become more bureaucratic by nature. Mm-hmm. And so what that does is it generally makes people more risk averse, right? So I think the risk aversion is like a really interesting aspect to all of this. You know, like there's almost like this weird, it's like a Nash equilibrium of inaction, you know, it's like everyone's playing the same game. And because there's so much risk tied to this in their mind, that all the existing players just end up doing nothing.
Yes.
And
yeah, absolutely.
Like, what's funny about this is like doing nothing is a terminal problem. The moment someone decides not to to decide to do something. And like, I think it's also worth noting here that doing nothing...
that prisoner's dilemma, right? As long as we all like hold the line,
yes,
we're good. As soon as one person flips,
yes,
you're dead.
But I would argue that like there's a problem in this thinking, right? Because it's like this assumes all the incumbents just decide to do nothing, right? But I think what's really interesting about AI is like it does kind of narrow the chasm that used to exist around like this information asymmetry in certain fields, right? There was like a gap that, you know, it was an expertise requirement to go into a space that you didn't natively...
I'm a hell of a lawyer these days.
Yeah, that's a great example, I think, right? So it's like, okay, so the real challenge here is like, okay, the incumbents can all decide to do nothing, right? And do nothing, by the way, could mean do something, but just not do enough to reach escape velocity, right? So like giving everyone in your team a ChatGPT Pro account, right? That's doing something, but it's not doing enough. So the issue here isn't necessarily like all the incumbents just persisting to do nothing, or the risk of one incumbent going, all right, let's embrace this. The risk is completely new entrants to a field that don't have the like traditional domain expertise, but they do have the AI native chops to go and build a native business from scratch.
This is where you take it back to the curve, right? And you say there's a bunch of businesses there that are operating at 100 revenue for a cost of 90, and you could be the business that comes in and you don't have to worry about product market fit. There's plenty of people willing to pay 100 for this, however we define that, the pricing power in the market, but you can deliver it at 10 at the same scale. So
exactly. Yeah.
It's just free money there for the taking, and like as I said, is like if anybody is listening to this and isn't asleep by now, then I mean obviously you're all like in your dark room just meditating, so it's easy to fall off. We get it.
Yeah.
But I think the point to get across is like again, this is not like Pete and Andy sitting around at the beach that know this, right? Like this is. There's a lot of serious interest in this. This is the only way this doesn't happen in my mind is if it doesn't lead to massive paybacks, and return on invested capital. And I just don't see it not.
Yes,
like
I think
venture returns with no profit market fit risk basically is insane.
It takes one, right?
Yep.
In any market, it only takes one player to come in and do this, and then you have to play the game. By design. It's either play the game or die. Like there's really no other choice at that point, right? Because like you could sit around and argue like, oh, but what about like the law of diffusion of innovators, right? There's always going to be these early adopters and then there's a mid-market and there's laggards. It's like, that's true, but I wonder if we just see like a huge squeezing of that law of diffusion of innovators curve.
Maybe, yeah. I think the problem is there's a point at which you are just no longer relevant.
Yeah.
You just can't compete if it gets driven down quick enough. And I don't see why it wouldn't get driven down quick enough, because the sort of returns that are available are going to be big enough that they're interesting. Yeah. And there's a lot of capital looking for something to do. Right? You know, like even one of the, I know from like a personal experience being in a previous firm going for a raise, like is the idea of like, it's useful to raise prior to a lot of VCs becoming deeply aware of the impact of AI on the ability of people to write code. Right? The amount of money that you're going to raise for a startup now to then spend on engineers to write code is not the same amount of money that you could have raised 2 years ago for engineers to write code, because everybody's cottoned on to the fact that actually you can do about 10x more than you could previously. So you don't need as many people as you thought you needed.
Oh, that's true.
So like there's this thing, and so the money is there though, right? And we've got the dollar is tanking at the moment, the bond rates are going up, like Trump's on Powell's back around like the interest rates being too high.
Yeah.
Like we know what's coming is, I mean, global M2 is already exploding with Europe spending billions of dollars on going to war. Like fucking, this is what we always seem to do. Like this is not going to slow down. Like as Lynn says, right? Nothing stops this train. Like we know the global money supply is going up. There's going to be more money available. It needs something to do. And here is an opportunity with like almost safe bet returns. And it's nuts. Like I just don't see tons and tons of money flowing into this space and attempting to capture that value over the next few years. And again, that's not really like the game that I'm playing.
Yeah.
That's just not what we do. But, you know, like what I care about is, all right, if this is going to happen, like, and I live here in Perth, like, what would I like to see out of that? And it's like, all right, well, if there's this big transition and there's some people that are going to make it through and some people that don't make it through, who do I really want to make it through? Well, ideally for me, I want like a really just robust, like small business, and small means hundreds of people. Like it doesn't necessarily mean like one-man band, but I'm not against one-man bands either.
Yeah.
But I would just like to have a lot of people, like strong entrepreneurs that own their own businesses, just doing really well out of this. And I think that's a great place to focus, because all of those people are resource constrained. None of them can afford the next people that they need. And there's huge benefits to be made out of AI for these people to then go and let's bring like the big down. Like let's like this. I mean, I think this is where it flows.
Yeah.
In general, is that we do start to relocalize like so much more stuff. I think bigger companies become smaller companies. I think medium companies become small companies, and small companies can become individual companies. Like, I don't necessarily think the dream is like the one-man unicorn sort of thing, but I think the 1 to 2 to 5 man business that services a shit ton of money is a thing.
Yeah. Well, the unicorn is just is arbitrary at that point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, it's a little bit around.
So I think, like, to summarize that, maybe the way I would frame it is this could be a renaissance for entrepreneurs. Like, if you're entrepreneurially minded, this is just an amazing time to be alive.
Yep.
Because there's just all of this opportunity that exists in basically any field that you want to put your mind to. If it interests you remotely, you could turn your attention to it. You can cross these like information asymmetry chasms really quickly. You can learn so much faster.
It all needs to be done as
exactly.
well, right? Like who's like not been getting fucked up the arse with inflation for the last 5 years? Just beep.
Yeah.
Some swearing in this one.
Yeah. It's lo-fi.
Like it's just like who doesn't want cheaper stuff?
Exactly.
Why don't we just reduce the cost of everything massively? Like that will benefit everybody. Now, there's a flow-on effect to this, which is that in doing that, you're going to be using less people to do a lot of the work. But frankly, this is gonna happen.
Yeah.
And like, I guess the thing that I always want to try and get out into the world is like, look, just be aware that this is likely to happen.
Yeah.
And you need to be evaluating your own position and like what your risks are, like what have you got on the table, like what does your cash flow look like for the next 10 years? Like, do you think your industry is going to be impacted? Do you think your job's safe? If, depending on how that rolls out, you need to be thinking about like, how am I going to deal with this? And like, I would talk all day with anybody that cares about that sort of stuff, because I don't want to see people get taken by surprise with this. But it is coming. Like, there's a big enough opportunity that it's likely to play out something like that. And there's also opportunities. Yeah. And like, it's not like work goes away. There's always going to be stuff to do, but it's a big dislocation. And like, that's the thing to be I just think a little bit aware of.
Well, it reorients work around value creation, right? Yes. It's like, does the thing that I'm doing in the moment lead to value creation in some meaningful way? Or am I just doing busy work? Am I having to do something administrative because we have a bloated tech stack that is not interoperable, that forces me to basically jam information through it? I think I don't know, I feel like we need to liberate people from those kinds of jobs, but I also get that like some people feel quite attached to them as well, because it's obviously paying the bills. They don't have to think too much. They're quite happy to just do this kind of work. But I think that kind of work is going away. And it's like, okay, there's the age of the entrepreneur, but you could almost like just define this as like a high agency era. If you are like high agency, you can make anything happen. Like, I know from personal experience, like the big awakening that I've had with all of this is just playing with cursor and just building this shit that I've always wanted to build but never knew how. Like, I don't know how to code, but I can interrogate, or I can basically build a process for how to do this with AI, and then have the AI write the code, and then I can also just ask it to tell me, there's this like chain of thought process here where it's like, just show me your reasoning. It's like when we were in school and, there'd be a math problem, but they would be like, oh, you didn't show your workings, so, you don't get all of the marks. It's basically the same, same approach. It's just like, do the thing, but show me how you got there. And that's useful, obviously, from like trying to figure out what this thing is deciding to build, but it's also helpful for someone like me who's using it as a learning process, right? It's like, I'm actually not that concerned about trying to deploy this bit of technology. It's just, can I build something, and can I learn how to code by doing? And this feels great for someone like me because, I think I've told you in the past, like I'll be up at like 2 o'clock in the morning, just completely lost track of time, building something in Cursor and just trying to add like that next feature and that next feature. And it's like, oh, this is just cool. Like, I love this. Yeah. And I feel like that works for me because, I consider myself quite entrepreneurial, and like, I just like the act of building. That's not going to be the case for everybody, but that's where I feel like the adjustment or the transition may be a bit rough.
Absolutely. I don't see it being any other way, and I mean, I guess this isn't the area I expected to get into today, but like it's the thing that worries me more than anything is just the like it's a big shift. It's a big shift. I think, as we said like last time, like this is a bit like the internet coming along, only I think it's probably going to be a lot more disruptive.
Yeah.
Like, maybe it's like the internet coming along and you're in like old school news publishing, and you had this like massive impact on your industry, or you were in the music industry, and you had this like massive shift in your industry that you had to adjust to. And it's been like the internet's been less played out in mining. Like, yes, we've used the internet and network technologies in that space over here in Perth, but it wasn't like a complete upheaval of everything that was done. Whereas this one, it's saying that like, oh, how the only way you could ever get any intelligence into your business was to purchase a human for X $100,000 a year. And they go, oh yeah. And you go, all right, well, that's not the case anymore. Now you can get it for 2 cents whenever you need it. And it depends how much you need. And you're like, oh, right, that's different. Like, it's like a fundamental shift to what's available to you. And it's going to take some time to diffuse, but it's so different. And as I said, like, I think we've had the experience of like working in this space for a little while to see like, shit, like I can develop production quality applications with just no developer team.
Yeah.
Do I use developers? Yes, I use them at different points in the process. But it's kind of nuts that you can do that. And that's a complex situation we're working in there. Like, there's so many processes that just shift that I just don't see jobs carrying on in the same way that they used to.
Yeah.
And then the problem is that we've built an entire society around the notion of credit. And like, I feel like a lot of the I mean, there's definitely a lot of rich people, and like certainly in Perth, like I think there's enough people that if you just happen to have a house, 20 years ago, you're pretty much set for life, right? But there's certainly a lot of like, I don't know, like poor rich, where you've always got like the latest car, you've always got the latest phones, you've always got the latest, you've got a nice big house, but you've kind of bought it on credit.
Yeah.
And the credit was like the play for 50 years, right? From the 70s to 2020, like interest rates only went downhill. Mm-hmm. And then in 2021, particularly in Australia, I can't remember exactly when it was. I feel like it's maybe like September 2021 when like we started yield curve control at the start of COVID, like which is to anybody that's following along at home, like yield curve control is what they had to do in Britain like after the world wars, because they were broke. it's massive like money printing and monetary expansion, which is by the way why everything costs 2 or 3 times what it used to do. But we did that in 2021. Like our yield curve control, which we've been doing for almost 2 years to that point, broke, and we could no longer keep the interest rates down in the banks by purchasing every single bond that the government put out. And then this is like the late 2021, early 2022 experience of people. I'm pretty sure those dates, maybe it was in 2022 going into 23. I'm pretty sure it was 21, because I remember talking to a colleague at the time about it and convincing him to fix his interest rate mortgage, which was a solid move. But and then since then, interest rates are going up.
Yeah.
And the trouble with credit is if interest rates go up, everything gets more expensive. And the other thing about buying everything on credit is the assumption that your salary goes up over time. So if you're in the 80s and you buy a house, and you buy it at an 80s price, and the price of like your debt goes down and down and down over time, and the price of your house goes up and up and up over time, and your salary goes up and up and up over time because it's just been like massive monetary expansion, so your salary just goes up, the interest rates come down. It's just such a winning trade.
Yeah.
And I just think there's no real memory in the world right now for, well, what would it look like if for the next 20, 30 years, we just had like a steady march of interest rates up to 17% again, like they were in like 17, 20%, 25%. Like it would crush everybody.
Yeah.
That's probably more of like a macro point, which I don't know if we want to go that way.
Yeah.
But then the flip side is, well, we're also betting on, I need to make these mortgage payments. So even my nominal payments, let's say they don't even really go up.
Yeah.
But the house prices are friggin' insane for a lot of people. And if I've got like a standard job, but I need to make 10, 15, 20 grand mortgage payments a month, like that's fucking nuts.
Yeah.
Like I don't know why people do this.
Yeah.
Like I can see how there's certain jobs people could do it, but it just seems like so much risk that I don't understand why you would take that on. But again, that assumes that like you and your partner are gainfully employed probably. And if you weren't for 6 months, then I wonder how many people could make it through that situation.
Exactly. Yeah.
And like that, I think, is the big risk, specifically here in like Perth, where we are. Right, is the housing market is insane. Like, I mean, similar to Sydney, it's a very Australian thing to just super lever the housing market. But if you have this shift in jobs, job expectations, and salary and wages, then unless you can flip to something where you're doing just as good in a new industry, I don't know. Like, it just seems like a super risky time period.
Yeah, like the question around how to service that 30-year debt instrument.
Yeah, exactly. Like, what do you do with it?
There's
like,
no predictability.
I just wouldn't want to be overextended in that space.
Yeah.
Like,
well, in the past, you'd have like a career for life. You know, you'd go and become a lawyer or a doctor or an engineer or something. Like, yeah, cool, this is what I'm going to do for the next 30, 40 years. Great.
Exactly.
But now it's like, do we even have this kind of certainty over the next like 5 years? You know, how are we rewriting?
Well, it's not even like, because you could look at ChatGPT, right?
Yeah.
And you go, who hasn't got a contract for income? You know what? I'm going to get a second opinion on this. Like, lawyer GPT, here we go. Like, what's going? And it's pretty good. Now, and that's not to say that, all right, all lawyers disappear. Like, we don't have to be even hyperbolic about it, but let's say there was 100,000 lawyers. Do you need 100,000 lawyers in a world where we have, like, really advanced language models? Like, if we, couple that with better tooling and systems that provide better lookups against various different bits of legislation, we employ graph databases, we can start to get better information out. We don't need to do everything in real time. We take our time about it. Like, I don't think you need the same amount of lawyers.
That's the key, isn't it?
And if let's say you need half the lawyers, all right. So now there's half the amount of lawyers. All right, what happens to those guys?
Exactly.
Are we just going to go? All right, well, I'll go in Uber and I'll make a lawyer's salary. Well, you're not. Like, it's like this salary compression is coming. Like, that's going to be the game. People will lose jobs and people will lose. I mean, some people I think are going to be paid massively in roles where they do things that are very creative and unique and can't be replicated. And I think some other people are going to end up in roles that just disappear and your salary gets crushed.
Well, it's way harder for juniors as well. Who are essentially trying to learn on the job.
Yeah.
Like, what need do you have of a lot of those, like, junior level lawyers? You know what's interesting about this example is, like, I was reading this the other day, I can't remember where, but there's something like legal intake into universities are like the highest it's ever been. So basically, like, colleges of law in universities are, the number of students taking on law degrees now is just the most it's ever been, which is interesting.
Isn't that the sort of thing that's correlated to coming recessions, where you see like a lot of people like dive in for long-term, like value-add courses at university, like when they fear a recession's coming in the next few years, because they think, all right, well, I'm not going to do very well. I'll take like 5 years out and get into law, and then I'll be good. 10 years down the line.
Yeah, I think there's the like you said, the salary compression piece to it. You might think everything just costs so damn much, especially as a young person. So what I need to do is go and get myself into what used to be really prestigious law school. Yeah.
Well-paid job.
Well-paid job, right? And it's like, well, do we know for sure that it's going to continue being like, I mean, I remember when I started as a grad lawyer, like, we didn't get paid much. Like, it was crazy. Like, expectations for a lot of guys at uni were that you'd get out and you'd have to basically, eat glass for a year or two. And
you certainly don't get paid you might get paid well, but it's not a good hourly rate.
Well, that's it. Yeah, exactly. So it's interesting. I think there's also maybe still this allure that exists. There's still like a sense that status is important, and some degrees or some disciplines hold that status. And I just think, like, this all goes away. Like, it's interesting because in some parts of the world, like, I saw a tweet about this, someone was saying that in Korea, like, coders are low status, and I was like, interesting.
Yeah,
like,
I saw that. Yeah.
I was like, I didn't realize that was a thing, and I just wonder if there's like a.
I mean, I don't think status goes away, because even animals, like.
No. I just mean assigned to title.
Oh yeah, certainly. Yeah. Like, some of the things that are seen as high status right now, I don't think would be.
Yeah. Anyway, let's maybe tie this back to the value trap, because I think like the fundamental question here as well is...
We never talked about how to get out of the value trap.
Well, that's the thing.
What we teased last episode.
There's this question, I think, if you're a business owner or a capital allocator, it's like, okay, well, what do I do, right? And I think there's like two options. There's buy or build, essentially. And I think what's interesting is, like, if you're already in the business, right, and what we're saying is that there's this Nash equilibrium that exists. So if you're risk averse, you're not going to just go and throw caution to the wind here. You've got existing business as usual that prints money for you. You're not just going to be like, let's throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's got to be like a model here that we can adopt. And I think what's really interesting here is that paradox that we established, I think, can be overcome by adopting this like Netflix incubation model that exists, right? So Netflix, obviously, like, way back when it started was, mailing out, like, it was a DVD by mail business, right? It's that was its core business, and I think they saw streaming coming along and were like, oh, maybe there's something here, but what we'll do is we'll just basically like create a streaming business and incubate it off to the side, because the other question here is like, okay, in order to build that business, it's going to require a different skill set that we maybe don't have in the core business. It's going to require different thinking. It's like the way we built our existing business is not the way to build the new business.
Yep.
And so I think this is maybe a way to, take the risk off the table for a lot of these businesses, so you're not stuck with this inertia, where you can essentially enable that experimentation to occur on the sidelines. Yep. And then over time, and allow that business to grow and scale, and you deprecate your core business, a bit like what Netflix has done.
Yep.
And so I think that's maybe the track. And so if, obviously you want to figure out how to do this, come chat to us. We might have some ideas, but I think that is like a more realistic track for existing management in some of these companies, whereby they can acknowledge that there's risk, but not get caught out by inertia over time. Yeah.
I mean, the other one is to change, right? How can I gut my company? Like, how can I change all my business processes? How can I move into this digital native world as fast as I can? And then I think like that was my initial gut feel for this was like, all right, that's what you have to do. And I think you termed it as like buy a moment ago, because I think that's what's appealing to a lot of the the capital allocation people that we talk to is like, all right, well, I should just go and buy all the businesses and then run this playbook.
Yes.
And then I make all the money. Fantastic.
Well,
it sounds great. And I think like if you're the owner of the business,
exactly,
you could do that. But it depends on like how, like what's the chance that we're just full of shit and we're wrong, right? Yep. I mean, this is like what we say to everybody. It's like, look, this looks compelling, right? We've got a chart, whiteboard, right? Yeah. I've got to use 2 different colours. It's a bit off. Like, I don't like spelling wasn't great, but you get the line and you know which line you want to be on, right? But 50-50, let's say I'm either full of shit or I'm not full of shit, so it's a 50-50 choice.
Yep.
Obviously that's not how probabilities work, I'm aware of that.
Yes.
But it's, like what if it takes 20 years? I mean, if you pull it off well and you've done the adjustments, then great. But you're also taking a business that might have been absolutely fine for 10 years.
Yep.
And you've taken a bit of a hatchet to it, and it might not have been the right thing to do.
Exactly.
And so I think what we were always looking for was like, okay, what's the sort of, risk down version of this? Where, like, how do you have both? Why not both? Like, the meme girl.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I think that's where I started to really like the Netflix model that you proposed, was just, all right, the answer here is why not both? You don't necessarily have to gut your current business, but you should be thinking about like, well, what does my business look like in 5 years, and how do I transition into that?
Yes.
And disrupting yourself. And I think that's a reasonably solid model that anybody can propose. And if it goes quick, well, then this one grows quicker. If it goes slow, well, this one grows slower, or maybe just doesn't play out at all.
Yes.
But at least you've got all the learnings of that when you then need to apply it into your core business. But don't necessarily kill the golden goose
exactly
straight away, straight out the gate. But just be aware that this could be happening. Like, if it is a golden goose, be aware that Christmas exists. Like it's a bad time for goose. And I think they're the kind of two options. But if you were a capital allocator, I think
it's interesting.
The game is to buy and to change.
It's not necessarily binary either, right? It's like you could buy the business to start the Netflix model, because like the challenge, if we're trying to steel man this for new entrants, it's like the challenge new entrants have is this cold start problem, right? The key thing you want through the acquisition is to get access to distribution.
Yeah.
That's kind of the thing you want to speed run here. So if you start from scratch, it's like, great, you could have an AI native business, but you still got to throw capital at customer acquisition.
Yes.
And you don't have trust or credibility in the market. There's all those kind of challenges exist. So that's me taking the other side of what I said earlier. So the way you could potentially overcome that is go, right, well, all of these incumbents are stuck in this like Nash equilibrium. Let me go buy one. I won't necessarily take the hatchet to the core business, but I will create the Netflix incubated model off on the side. I'll bring in the right people if required to actually help me build this thing, and then you just have this slower deprecation of the core business over time. And yeah, I don't necessarily think you need to do one or the other, because in that situation, the acquisition buys you the sticky customers and the distribution, as well as the trust, if that exists.
Yeah. I mean, I guess my gut feel there is I think the sell, because if you're talking in the buy model, you're probably in like the VC private equity space.
Yep.
You're thinking about you've got your own investors, you've got your own sell to people downstream of like, well, what is the opportunity here? I think the Netflix model would be a harder
for sure.
sell
Yeah.
to there. And
well, so they're not builders, right?
Yeah,
they're
exactly.
capital allocators. Yeah.
And like, if you're in private equity, you're more about taking cost out of a business than you're about building up the new thing. So I could see that being. Yeah. I guess my point would be that, like, let's say of 100 units of private equity money that come in, I'd almost expect 80 of them to just be focused on gutting the business.
Yeah.
Well, not gutting. That sounds like harsh, but I mean, what we're actually talking about is a process re-engineering effort.
That's right.
The business, but I think they're more likely to. That feels like if I was in that space, it would be the lower risk to me would be to go, all right, well, instead of incubating a new thing, I've got a thing.
Yeah.
I'll just change the thing that's ahead of me.
Yes.
And then I don't have to worry about transitioning customers. And
well, the thing, I think you kind of mentioned this earlier about private equity, is like they were satisfied in the existing paradigm. Let me take the other side of this. No, but you mentioned this about private equity. It's like they were satisfied with the kind of smaller percentage point improvement from a financial engineering perspective in the past. Like they were happy with that. And so the question here is like, okay, well, you could take the hatchet to this business and cut 80% of the cost out, or you could surgically remove 20%, and then you've still gotten like a very decent return on equity. And that might be the thing they do, because I feel like the jump from 20% to 80% of cost reduction is actually where the risk is.
Yeah.
And maybe those numbers are arbitrary, but yeah, the more you try to, hatchet your way through cost reduction, the more risk you're baking into, how does this impact the customer experience, right? So
yeah. I mean, I guess, like we're talking in a bunch of absolutes.
Of course.
In a very unclear future. Yeah. I mean, there's also, I just like, why wouldn't you just reduce your costs?
Yeah.
Like, just do it.
Yeah.
Just seems nuts not to.
I think there's also like a American centricity to what we have been discussing versus
that's
an Australian centricity, which I think is more like there are more restrictions here that limit your ability to cut cost, where that cost is essentially represented as human capital. It's like we have industrial relations laws that are very strict.
And wages are high.
Wages are high
over here. Like I think we have. I mean, just like talking to the Adapt guys and some of the stats that they would throw around with the SME industry in Australia, I think it's reasonably clear that a lot of the SME industry in Australia is resource constrained. Like, there are a lot of good businesses that can't afford to hire the next people that they need to grow. And they're solid. They could be more they could be more profitable, they could be stronger businesses, but you almost need to let the shackles off. Take the shackles off. That makes more sense than taking the gloves off.
Yes, that's right.
Maybe that's the analogy. Like, we'll workshop the memes.
Like mixing our metaphors.
You know what we haven't talked about is the actual answer to all of this stuff.
Yeah.
Like the simple one that anybody could do.
Yes.
I wonder if we should.
Go on.
Well, like for maybe about 2 years now, whenever I've talked to anybody about Bitcoin, my initial advice was always just buy Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Did I say, I think I said, like, when I talked to anybody about Bitcoin, but I actually meant to say AI, but there you go.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so whenever I've talked to anybody about AI, like, my general advice was just buy Bitcoin. Like, that's the sort of left curve response to this.
It's the way out of the value trap.
It is. It's like, what the value trap really is an arbitrage opportunity. It will happen because you can make so much more money in a short amount of time than you could the previous year.
Yeah.
And that will be so compelling to so many people that they're going to invest in this. Mm-hmm. And they will generate huge returns very quickly. And then there'll be flow-on consequences of that. So, I mean, we talked about the idea that, you know, what that means is you're displacing a lot of jobs. And a lot of people won't have income necessarily. So, again, like, what's the sort of second, third order consequences of this is, do we think that there will be increased reliance on or pushes for government to become more interventionist in, I don't know, UBI? Or do we think that there'll be pushes for government to bail people out of bad mortgages and mortgage debt? Do we think there'll be pushes for debt jubilee? Do we think there'll be more handouts? Do we think there'll be more unemployment in a world where significantly more of the voters are unemployed? for a brief period of time.
All roads lead to money printing.
All roads lead to money printing. So you've got a few different risks. So we always talk about the other stuff, methodology, our core meme.
Yes.
is up, up, down, right? Which is, go on.
It's margin up.
Margin up.
Margin up. So we
capital
start.
up.
It's capital up and risk down.
And risk down. And like the risk down bit is like the margin and the capital are way more tied to like the technologies that we focus on. And I think the risk down stuff is more about like, okay, well now let's think through the second order consequences of what we're talking about here. And I think when you talk about the value trap, you're talking about massive job displacement, and you're talking about like interventionist policies coming down the line in the future. And I think in that world, like what you need to think about is maybe just a sidetrack for one moment. Like there's a great story from, well, it's not a great story, from like the Weimar Republic days, their hyperinflation.
Yeah.
That's why it's not a great story.
It's
just a useful analogy.
Didn't end well.
Yeah, but there's 0 out of 10.
Yeah.
Would not recommend. Like there was 1 year where the cost of the newspaper, let's say this is year 4 and year 5 of the hyperinflation.
Oh yeah.
And the cost of a newspaper in year 5 was the same nominal figure as all of the money that existed in year 4.
Yes.
And so it would be like if you're in the US and next year a newspaper cost $36 trillion.
Yeah, exactly.
Like that would be quite a jump. At that point, you probably didn't want dollars in that situation.
Exactly.
If the newspaper costs 36 trillion of them, you might be a bit fucked. And I find that instructive to look at, like, okay, what happens when systems break? And I think what we've seen is we had, again, a 50-year march down of interest rates. Like we were in one fundamental system for a long time from 1970s, which is all based on petrodollars and everything that we've seen that was going on in the world from a macro lens, and it shifted in 2020 and it ticked up and it's been marching up ever since. And interestingly, recently with all the tariff stuff that came about, we've now seen, like the dollar is collapsing, the bonds are going up, gold suddenly racing. Like I saw Bitcoin put on like 8 grand last night. I was like, all right, it's okay, good on you,
solid.
10 out of 10 would recommend.
Yes. 0
But
out of 10 Weimar Republic, 10 out of 10 Bitcoin.
That's my general. Like
Yes.
Bitcoin, great cult, 10 out of 10 would recommend.
That's it.
But
Great cult.
it's a solid cult. Like literally, just it's a bunch of nice guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like it.
That's it.
It's my favourite one. Shit, where was I? Yeah, so you got to think about like, well, what are the system? The system could break.
Yes.
I'm not saying it will break, but if you believe that there is such a big opportunity here with these sort of technologies, and the way that it plays out is that it collapses like the value of labour and intelligence in the world, it's going to have a big impact on the job market. And if you have a big impact on the job market, you have a big impact on the housing market, the saving market, the salary, the labour, like everything. Yeah, everything shifts. And in that world, like if it breaks and we end up in this sort of hyperinflationary system, or just even like a rapid inflationary system, like I don't know if we could cope with 20%. Yeah, people have been in a lot of trouble with 5% interest rates at the moment, and 5% is not high, historically speaking.
It's like debt to income as well as the other ratio to look at, right? It's way higher than it was in the 70s.
Yeah. So. And obviously we're pontificating about stuff.
Yeah, of course.
We're interested in, and we follow a lot of stuff on. We're not necessarily the experts, but you can sort of think through like what might happen here.